Till Tennessee.
Good evening. I'm Howard K. Smith in Miami Beach.
I'm Harry Reasoner. These are tonight's headlines. The Republicans open their national convention to renominate President Nixon and Vice President Agnew. The Rules Committee still wrestles with the problem of how to apportion delegates in 1976. 3,000 South Vietnamese troops push westward into Khe Sanh Valley against heavy enemy ground resistance and artillery fire. And Copernicus, an unmanned space laboratory equipped with powerful telescopes, is launched into orbit from Cape Kennedy. Howard?
Reports tonight from Herbert Kaplow with a comparison of the Republican and Democratic platforms, Dick Shoemaker on Congressman Paul McCluskey's futile attempt to inject a voice of dissent into the GOP convention, Arnold Collins on what happens to people caught up in a North Vietnamese offensive, George Watson on the Indian presence in England, Frank Tomlinson on devastating floods in South Korea, and tonight's comment on national political conventions, old style and new style. Harry?
The Republicans call themselves the party of law and order, among other things, and it was all in clockwork order today as the 30th National Republican Convention opened here in Miami Beach. The protest scene was relatively quiet as the convention got underway. About 1,000 demonstrators shouted anti-war slogans outside the hall, then marched to an encampment of National Guard troops. 6 persons were arrested in the demonstrations that followed. Actress Jane Fonda joined the protesters here today, urging them to continue their demonstrations after the convention ends. Ms. Fonda said she will not be here for the main event planned by demonstrators, an attempt to block the convention hall when President Nixon appears on Wednesday. Howard?
The final planks have now been hammered down in the Republicans' draft platform, and while there may be some small alterations on the convention floor, no major changes are expected. The Republican and Democratic platforms will undoubtedly set the tone of the coming campaign, so ABC's Herbert Kaplow has a comparison.
This year, the two platforms reflect perhaps more faithfully than ever before the differences between the two parties and their two candidates. First, on Vietnam, the Democrats call for an immediate and complete withdrawal of all U.S. forces in Indochina. The Republicans back the president's proposal to withdraw remaining American forces from Vietnam within 4 months after an internationally supervised ceasefire and when all prisoners have been returned. On national defense, the Democrats talk of a prudent, responsible defense which would make it possible to shift some money to domestic problems. The Republicans warn against Meat Act slashes they would have us believe Senator McGovern favors. On amnesty, the Democrats favor it, they say, on an appropriate basis when the fighting's ended and the troops and prisoners have been returned. The Republicans say of amnesty, not now. On busing, the Democrats talk of it as another tool for desegregation that must continue to be available. The Republicans say they're irrevocably opposed to busing for racial balance, and if necessary, they would favor consideration of an anti-busing constitutional amendment. Those are probably the 4 biggest differences between the Democratic and Republican platforms. Both parties endorsed equality for women, but dodged the sensitive specific of abortion. Both parties favor tax reform, but they're not too specific about that. The Republicans' platform draft favors prayer in the public schools on a voluntary basis. The Democrats say nothing on that subject. The Democrats do come out again against letting the states enact right-to-work laws. The Republicans, in what is seen as courting organized labor, choose this year to say nothing rather than again favor letting the states have their way on right-to-work legislation. So those are the platforms, overall more precise than usual, giving us a preview of the campaign debate we're likely to see and hear over the next 2.5 months. Herbert Kaplow, ABC News in Miami Beach.
There's a possibility of a slight skirmish over one item in the Republican platform, and End the Draft plank in its present form says that the party expects to eliminate draft calls by July of 1973. Well, a group of delegates headed by Senator Mathias of Maryland says it wants the plank to state flatly the draft will end by that time and may seek to change the wording on the convention floor. Harry?
Republicans opened with a 2-hour afternoon session, and ABC's Frank Reynolds was there to keep an eye on it, and we are going to have a report from him now on what happened here in Miami Beach.
To emphasize the difference between the Democratic commotion in this hall last month and their orderly, businesslike procedures, the Republicans are calling this the on-time convention. So today they started and stopped on schedule.
The 30th National Convention of the Republican Party is hereby convened.
Ironically, the first speech at the 30th Republican National Convention was given by a Democrat, Florida's Governor Reuben Askew, who told the delegates they were most welcome this year.
Governor Reagan and I were just sipping some Florida orange juice backstage, and I told him not to fret about losing your convention this year. In 1976, I'll promise to do everything I can to see that California gets both conventions.
Although this first session was taken up by largely routine matters, National Chairman Dole had some harsh words for the opposition.
The nation must now choose between Richard Nixon's belief in the value of what has gone before us and his belief that we can build on it and improve upon it, even as those who have gone before us have done, and the belief of George McGovern that what is radical is always right, that things as they are or ever have been are always wrong.
Mrs. Mamie Eisenhower addressed the convention from her home in Gettysburg.
4 years is not long enough for any president to try to put together what he wants for this country, the good of this country, or trying to carry out his campaign promises. He needs all of the 8 years to do this.
The next session might be called Monday Night at the Movies, complete with movie stars, past and present. Ronald Reagan will make a speech, and James Stewart will narrate a film about the First Lady. There will be 3 keynote speeches, but probably the emotional highlight of the evening will be the appearance on the podium of Mrs. Nixon, who will then bring this second session of the on-time convention to a close with a speech precisely planned to last 2 1/2 minutes. This is Frank Reynolds on the convention floor.
We'll have more news in a minute.
I've never been happier. The kids are doing well. We have a beautiful grandchild. Charlie and I spend more time together than ever, and he still treats me in that very special way. It really pays to take care of yourself. I exercise, eat right, and to be sure I get enough iron and vitamins, I take Geritol every morning. Charlie does too.
Geritol, more than twice the iron of ordinary supplements, plus 7 vitamins. Take care of yourself. Take Geritol.
Honey, you're incredible.
Do I look like a sourpuss? Well, that's what my grandchildren called me the last time they were here. And I'm afraid they were right. You know how it is when you're constipated. I tried all kinds of laxatives, always hoping to find one that was both gentle and effective. Then I found Seratan. Seratan's made from natural ingredients, so it's really gentle. And does Seratan really work? Well, they're not going to call me sourpuss today.
If there's going to be a fight about anything at this Republican convention, it could be about rules for selecting delegates to the next one in 1976. This dispute pits the smaller and more conservative states against the larger states. Late today, the committee considering the matter appeared to be somewhat near a compromise which would avoid a floor fight. The chances for dissent on the floor on more substantive issues was just about ended today. The seating of a delegate for Republican peace candidate Paul McCloskey was rejected. ABC's Dick Shoemaker reports.
McCloskey took his final fight to the Credentials Committee. The congressman from California wanted his one delegate from New Mexico to make a nominating speech criticizing President Nixon's war policies.
And the principle is whether or not we continue to welcome dissent and permit it to be fairly expressed by people who believe in that dissent, regardless of the fact that the majority vote will ultimately resolve the issue.
The Credentials Committee had the power to allow McCloskey's one delegate to speak on the convention floor, and a few young members of the committee thought it was a good idea.
I am very much committed to Mr. Nixon, and I have been opposed to Mr. McCloskey, but just in a sense of fair play, I would urge you to accept a challenge. I think the nation watches, and we have been told by the press that we're a closed party and that we don't want any minority views. And I simply think that on the basis of fair play that it would be good to accept the challenge.
But the full Credentials Committee said no. They decided any nominating speech from the floor must have the support of the entire delegation, and it did not. McCluskey was asked if this decision was good for the Republican Party.
I think it's terrible for the Republican Party. The one thing that could destroy us in the November election is a common appreciation of the fact that this party is controlled by big business, by the power of big campaign contributions, by the power from above to repress the expression of differing views and dissent. And everything in this convention, with the exception of what just happened, has indicated the hand of the White House. I'm afraid we can lose this election in November just by the appearance that the party is controlled from above rather than the true party where people can express differing views from below. And that's what this party has to be if we're ever going to be a majority.
McCluskey hasn't given up hope. He said if a few young people stood up and supported him today before the Credentials Committee, then maybe, just maybe, the unlikely may happen. And others will speak out against Republican policies they don't like. Dick Shoemaker, ABC News, in Miami Beach.
60 delegates to the Republican convention are black, along with 184 black alternates. Today, the black Republicans held a caucus. ABC's Lem Tucker reports.
Supposed to be another one of those well-rehearsed events to further praise the president and to keep the theme of total Republican unity going. It was supposed to be just that. But in walked some administration spokesmen. They invited comments and questions, and they got them.
What is this black caucus for? Is this a black caucus, or this a meeting that has been called for the administration to address their viewpoints, what they have done?
I didn't come all the way from Texas to hear a lot of praises or a bunch of rhetoric. I came here for one thing. That was to look into the future and see what we can do to improve the relationship.
I find myself in a defensive posture simply because I cannot defend what has been characterized as some of the drawbacks of the Nixon administration, which could almost be characterized as racist.
We don't plead perfection, but we think we've made an awful lot of progress. And
we're not here to get into an emotional situation. If you have some specific suggestions, we want them. That's why we're here. We didn't come here to talk down to you.
The spokesmen for the president were starting to squirm when suddenly, to their rescue, came some administration glamour.
I'm delighted to be with all of you, and that I'd like to tell you that I am one of a small band, but a growing band of people who believes that this year the Republican Party will do much better among black voters. I don't think that we're going to see the massive voting for the Democratic Party, and I think that the reason is that the Nixon administration, in a quiet but very effective way, has really done the best that it can do for the black man in America.
That comment brought a murmured hiss of disapproval from a number of the delegates, and she got only polite and very limited applause when she finished. There's probably a message here for Richard Nixon. If black Republicans are this unhappy with his administration, what about the millions of other black voters who will be going to the polls in November who feel no allegiance to the Republican Party? Lem Tucker, ABC News, Miami Beach.
The White House announced today that President Nixon will make public appearances in Chicago, Michigan, and San Diego the day after the Republican convention ends. Specifically, Mr. Nixon will address the American Legion in Chicago, dedicate a high school in Utica, Michigan, and speak to a San Diego airport rally. Yesterday, President Nixon signed a bill providing $1.6 billion in flood relief for areas damaged by Tropical Storm Agnes and the flood last spring in South Dakota. Well, today, George McGovern began a week-long campaign swing by touring one area hit by Agnes, northeastern Pennsylvania. And later this week, McGovern is due to meet with Chicago's Mayor Richard Daley, who failed to turn up for a meeting with the Democratic candidate last week in southern Illinois. In Chicago today, Daley said he thinks McGovern's campaign to date has been more effective than that of Hubert Humphrey at the same point in 1968. Asked if his snub of last week indicated he's angry with McGovern, Daley replied, "I never get angry at anybody."
When you save your money at a savings and loan, your money does more than just grow. A savings and loan lends out money for homes, and that helps communities grow.
I'm Marlene Francis, and I'd like to test your judgment. Which of these antacid tablets would you say is stronger? I mean, which do you think settles more of the acid that causes heartburn or indigestion? Well, once again, the biggest is not the best. The smaller Phillips tablet is concentrated, so it's stronger than either of the leading antacid tablets that come in a roll. There is no contest. Phillips tablets are stronger. You'll like them.
3,000 South Vietnamese troops made their counter move today into Khe Son Valley near Da Nang. In the face of heavy ground and artillery fire, the government troops pushed slowly westward in an effort to regain strategic ground taken late last week by North Vietnamese forces. Earlier today, American bombers pounded the enemy in an attempt to block an expected attack on Da Nang itself. Da Nang Air Base, 2 miles south of the city, houses 5,000 Americans. Whenever the North Vietnamese move forward, the hapless inhabitants of the area have the choice of becoming refugees or of taking their chances with the conquerors. That's been the experience of the people of Binh Dinh province in past months. We have a report now from ABC's Arnold Collins.
This is Binh Dinh province. When the North Vietnamese occupied the district towns of Binh Dinh during their spring offensive, the people became unwitting battlefield companions of the North Vietnamese army. These people told how the North Vietnamese army tried to bring them along on the battlefields in spite of the fighting and the attacks by U.S. naval gunfire and U.S. aircraft. They said they evaded attempts to induct their men into the North Vietnamese army. When the South Vietnamese pushed back, most of the people flooded south to the safety of the government lines. 54,000 refugees flooded into refugee camps in Phu My Town, where they now are waiting for any chance to return to their homes north of here. They have no friends but themselves. The number of their dead and wounded in this offensive and counteroffensive has not been tabulated. There is some talk here of enforced labor by the North Vietnamese, and many of these people knew minor South Vietnamese officials who were executed when they became caught in the net of the North Vietnamese offensive. But despite U.S. government allegations, no one in this largest refugee camp in Binh Dinh province has heard of any real atrocities against civilians. But then, perhaps the concept is not altogether meaningful to them. For them, the fortunes of war have been harsh enough. Arnold Collins, ABC News, Phu My Town, South Vietnam.
A report on racial tensions in England in a moment.
It would take all the dogs and cats registered in New York City, Los Angeles, Tampa, Boston, San Diego, Puerto Rico, Chicago, and then some to wear all the Hearts 90-day collars we've sold so far. Over 30 million Hearts 90-day collars. Now look at your pet. Shouldn't he be wearing the collar that conquered the flea? That protects him from itchy fleas for up to 3 months? The Hearts 90-day collar. From Hartford to Honolulu, it's the collar that conquers the flea.
The microscope proves it.
Great Lash, Maybelline, puts lashes in the thick of things, builds great body, real protein. Great Lash, Maybelline.
The microscope proves the difference before and after Great Lash. Build a brush applicator finds, colors, thickens lashes you didn't even know you had. See your skimpy lashes look thick, thicker, thickest. Great Lash Mascara. Fine eye makeup sensibly priced. Maybelline.
The Sunday sunburn happens when you try to get a suntan in just one day. To relieve the pain and cool the burn, you need Solarcane. Take the "oh, I never burn" sunburn. When that happens, you hurt. To relieve the pain and cool the burn, you need Solarcane. It's America's #1 aid and comfort for the Sunday sunburn. Lotion, spray, and smooth spreading foam. Solarcane.
President Idi Amin of Uganda is in process of expelling from Uganda 60,000 Indians who hold British passports. The Indians make up much of Uganda's middle class. Most of them are shopkeepers whose families settled in Uganda when it was a British colony. Amin is expelling them as part of what he calls his economic revolution. Many of the expellees presumably will want to emigrate to Britain, where Indians already live in numbers and face problems. ABC's George Watson reports.
There's nothing about the climate or atmosphere of this grimy industrial city in the British Midlands that makes it comparable to either India or Africa. But already Leicester has a thriving Asian community made up largely of Indians who came here after Britain began granting independence to its African colonies back in the 1960s. Today, about 40,000 of them live in a ghetto called Highfields. It resembles any British working-class neighborhood, but the new residents have carried out a cultural transformation. The shops stock Indian goods, grocers cater to Indian tastes for spicy foods and blistering hot curry. This neighborhood, like most of Britain, is already overpopulated, but an Indian community leader insists it can cope with an influx of refugees from Uganda.
I definitely think that I can handle the people here, and I can approach the various authorities, and they will be very willing to help.
And the Englishmen on the street will welcome these new immigrants?
I say 85 to 90% will welcome them very willingly.
One reason Leicester has enjoyed good race relations is full employment. Many of the Indian men work in the city's factories and foundries. Some work side by side with Englishmen, but employment, like housing, is usually segregated. Many Englishmen are nonetheless worried about this large Asian population in their midst and the threat that many thousands more may be on the way. I asked the leader of a racist political party called the National Front about his supporters.
There's no animosity outwardly, but there is an inner frigidness, I believe, on both parts.
And you have this segregated situation?
You have this segregated situation, which I believe is far from being harmony, is on an uneasy peace, I should like to call it myself.
The British government is working hard to diffuse the threat of racial trouble. Both Englishmen and Indians fear the new arrivals could upset the old balance. But if the Asians are forced to leave Africa, many of them will want to come here. And so this overcrowded island is bracing itself for a new wave of immigration. This is George Watson, ABC News, Leicester.
We'll have more news in a moment.
There's a headache out there waiting for you. When the pain comes, be ready for it with Bufferin. This illustrates by the time most of Bufferin is going to your headache, most of plain aspirin is still in your stomach. And with Bufferin, there's less chance of stomach upset, too. Be ready for your next headache with Bufferin. Faster to your headache, better for your stomach.
Know what your eyes are up against today? That. Tons of garbage, like smoke, chemicals, pollen, dust. Great for the eyes. You want more? Here. Close work under harsh, glaring lights. No wonder your eyes burn, get red like this. Plain eye drops might soothe them, but only Visine has tetrahydrozoline to soothe and get the red out. The same eye after Visine. Soothing Visine gets the red out.
In other news, the United Nations Security Council has entered the controversy over Rhodesia's participation in the Olympic Games in Munich. 12 African nations and Guyana have threatened to boycott the Games if white-dominated Rhodesia takes part. Today, the Security Council advised West Germany, as the Olympic host, that participation by Rhodesia might be in violation of UN sanctions and asked West Germany to take steps to ensure that the sanctions are not violated. The space observatory named Copernicus, the largest and most complicated unmanned space laboratory ever launched, was hurled into orbit from Cape Kennedy today. Copernicus has 6 telescopes, the largest of them 32 inches in diameter, and scientists will be able to study the stars and clouds in a manner never before possible. Copernicus weighs 4,900 pounds, cost more than $61 million, and hopefully will send back data from its orbit of approximately 460 miles above the Earth for more than 5 years. Governor Moore of West Virginia has asked President Nixon to declare a major disaster area in 4 counties hit by flash flooding over the weekend. At least 1 person was killed, 200 families are homeless as a result of the floods, which hit the southern part of the state. Damage is estimated at nearly $7 million. Howard will have tonight's comment in a moment.
When we bought that big old house we always wanted, there were problems. The paneling looked so dull and dingy. But new Liquid Regard saved us.
Liquid Regard conditions. Its organic oil restores the beauty of paneling, and a special polymer keeps wood glowing for a long time. Liquid Regard even helps hide scratches. It also removes stubborn dirt with ease and gives cabinets a new glow.
Regard gave our wood paneling a beautiful new look.
New Liquid Regard Wood Panel Conditioner from Johnson Wax.
When Charlie finally moved that cabinet, you could see that floor had yellowed. So I got moving. I scrubbed off the old wax. Then I tried Clear. It doesn't yellow. Afterwards, I felt proud.
Clear. It never yellows.
For all the studies of it, the American convention system remains a mystery. David Brinkley's epigram of some years back remains the ultimate judgment. Somehow, he said, it is not clear how it works. 4 weeks ago, the Democrats held a convention here, new style, severely reformed to make it rigorously representative of grassroots wishes. It nominated George McGovern. The Republicans have now begun an old-style, unreformed convention here, the kind that somehow works. It will nominate Richard Nixon. Look at the pro tem results in the polls published yesterday. Gallup says that Nixon has a 26% lead, a record over McGovern. Time magazine says Nixon's lead is 2-1. Both polls make it clear that these standings are less due to gains by Nixon than to defections from McGovern. The huge Nixon lead, of course, won't last. Campaign erosion and the tendency of Democrats to revert to their own party in the polling booth will cut it. But if Nixon retains just a quarter of that lead, he will win a near landslide. But the question is, how is it that the old-style convention, which gave the Democrats FDR, Truman, Kennedy, Johnson, provides representative candidates, while the logical new-style convention gives the Democrats a candidate from whom the faithful seem to be running as if from the plague? 35% are said to be defecting at present. I don't know the answer, but to reverse the epigram, somehow and so far, the new style doesn't seem to work. Harry?
Thank you, Howard. That's tonight's news and a comment. I'm Harry Reasoner. Good night.
The Tennessee Department of Welfare needs foster homes for many children. For information, call the Tennessee Department of Welfare, 329-4538.
The High Chaparral traces the adventures of the Cannon family in their struggle to maintain a cattle ranch.